Kerbal Space Program is a game with a fiercely loyal fanbase and dedicated developers who, since the game's release from beta in April 2015, have released frequent updates and new content. The game lets players take control of their own space program and gives them a large assortment of rocket parts which they are free to assemble into any creation their imagination and the limits of physics will allow. With these creations, the player can then travel through a detailed, simulated sandbox, styled after our own solar system, where they can explore planets, moons, and asteroids. And now, with the announcement of a sequel which was beyond the wildest expectations of die-hard fans, I have decided to ask one of the most frequently asked questions from people outside the community, and that is, why is Kerbal Space Program fun? First, the word fun is one of the most triggering words to a games designer, because fun is a very subjective word that means different things to different people. The sort of fun that players get out of a game like Factorio from micromanaging the efficiency of a factory is a different sort of fun experienced by FPS players. One word designers use instead is borrowed from psychology: flow. Being in a state of flow is something you have no doubt experienced, and may not have been aware that this feeling had a name. Flow is described as an intense and focused concentration on the present moment, a merging of action and awareness, the loss of reflective self-consciousness, a sense of personal control or agency over the situation or activity, and a distortion of temporal experience where one's subjective experience of time is altered. Flow is when a professional footballer becomes one with the ball, or when a musician lets the music flow through them, or when a video game fully absorbs your attention. Flow is achieved when a task that you're performing reaches a perfect balance between difficulty and your own skill. If your skill is too high and the difficulty too low, then the task becomes boring. But if the task is too difficult and your skill level is too low, the task becomes stressful. The experience of being in flow is described as being incredibly euphoric, so obviously games designers want to keep players in that zone as long as possible. The challenge for games designers is scaling difficulty so that it matches the player's skill growth, keeping the player in a state of flow as they improve at the game. With sandbox games, like KSP however, the game imposes no set goals on the player, and depending on the player this can either feel incredibly liberating or very daunting. In KSP, the player will tend to set their own targets based on what they think they can do, be that getting a rocket into orbit, sending a lander to a moon, building a space station, or achieving an interplanetary expedition. Through trial and error they develop the intraludic knowledge required to improve their skill, or if they're like me, they seek out extraludic knowledge, from MIT lectures on orbital mechanics and Scott Manley videos. Either way, the player's skill develops to what's required to complete their self-imposed goal, until they achieve it and then set their next, more difficult goal. Therefore, self-managing themselves to keep themselves in a state of flow. Which brings me into my final point, the game's ludonarrative. The ludonarrative is where gameplay mechanics and the narrative story of a game intersect. The narrative KSP wants the player to have is that of a space program building up its knowledge of physics and engineering by doing progressively more complex and interesting missions. Compare that to the overall gameplay experience of the player, which is building up a knowledge of physics and engineering by doing progressively more complex and interesting missions. The game is laser focused on the experience it wants its players to have. To me, this message feels a little nebulous, which is my fault for asking such a vague question to begin with. But in my mind, this is what makes Kerbal Space Program work as a game. It gives you the freedom to achieve whatever goals you want in your clearly defined quest to build a space program and explore the universe around you. Add to that the limitless combinations of parts, mean no matter how good you get, you can always set your goals just a little bit higher and achieve a near endless state of flowing entertainment.